Welcome to the Schuby Show, where sports, movies, TV shows, technology, history, and more come to life. Now, please be seated and get ready for some more never-ending nonsense with yours truly, Schuby.
This is the Schuby Show with yours truly, Carson Schubert. And today on the show, we've got a guest that most people from the Rock Rapids, Sioux Falls area should be familiar with, and his name is Phil Schreck. Phil Schreck is the KSFY senior meteorologist, and he is going to be joining the show today to talk a little bit about his career and some of his interests. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about the eclipse to start things out, and we'll hopefully have a good conversation, 30 to 45 minute talking with him. Again, you can get the show on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Google Play, all of those fine places where you can get this podcast. So please look into those places if one of those suits you better. And that is, and of course, you can go to our website also, theschubyshow.com, to find all of our shows and content on there. Well, I guess you can't find all of our shows on there, but you can find where all of our shows are by clicking on Listen to the Show and scrolling down to one of those fine places where you can find our show on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, and all those places. So please go to our website, and you can find all the information you need there to listen to the show. And if you have a guy, gal, or anybody just in general that you would like to have on the show, please let me know. A good recommendation. Or if you personally would be a good guest to have on the show, please let me know. I'd love to have you on. If you have, if you're kind of a unique job or kind of a unique ability, something, I don't know, just to talk about sports, TV shows, meteorology today, music, anything like that, I'd love to have you on. We've had some good guests. We've had Jerry Mathers on from Leave It to Beaver, the Leave It to Beaver star. We've had Jason Romano on, an ESPN, former ESPN producer. We've had Arif Hassan on, a Vikings writer. We've had Rhett Bollinger on, MLB.com's Twins beat writer. So we've had some bigger names on here, but we're still looking for guests that are around this area too. So no guest is too small or too big for the Schuby Show. We'll just say that it's been a good run. We've kind of had a little bit of time off, but hopefully again we'll have a good solid month of shows here in a row. So every week. Next week, hopefully we'll have another guest on, and we'll talk more about him next week, most likely. So that is going to do it. And when you come back, I will be with KSFY senior meteorologist, Phil Schreck. Welcome back to the Schuby Show, and we are now joined by KSFY senior meteorologist, Phil Schreck. You can follow him on Twitter at PhilKSFY. Phil, it's great to have you on here today.
Yeah, great to be here. I'm glad you're interested in talking to me.
Absolutely. You're kind of in the fame of southeast corner of South Dakota and northwest corner of Iowa and southwest corner of Minnesota. You're kind of famous around here.
Well, thank you. I hope so. I've been here long enough, even just by osmosis, I guess. Maybe people know who I am. I've been here almost 29 years now.
So yeah, you're pretty well known around the area, but there are probably plenty of people that don't maybe know who you are, that are maybe listening. And sure. I don't know a whole lot about you personally, so why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about where you grew up and a little bit about yourself.
Well, sure. Yeah, it's kind of a long story. I'll try to shrink it down a little bit. But my dad was in the military, so we moved around a lot, pretty much my whole life. I was born in Carroll, Iowa, as a matter of fact. So I'm an Iowan
All
by
right.
birth. And at that time, my dad was a dentist in Carroll. And then a few years later, he was commissioned into the Army as a dentist. And so our first move was to Fort Rucker, Alabama. And we were there, boy, I was probably 5, 6 years old, and we were there for a couple of years. I had vague memories of Fort Rucker. I remember going to kindergarten there. I remember just a couple little things about it. I remember one time my dad and I went for a walk, and I picked up a pine cone. He said, "Yeah, take that back to Mom. She'll like that." And then all of a sudden there was a wasp.
Ooh.
I think it was a wasp nest in there. So thankfully, and I didn't get stung, but I threw the pine cone down. And from that point on, I've been terrified of wasps and bees, and I've never in my life been stung, thankfully, because I guess I'm just hypersensitive about if there's a bee around, I do what I can to get away from it. But anyway, that's just a memory of Fort Rucker. and then my dad was sent to Vietnam in 1967. So then we moved back and lived in Templeton, Iowa, which is where he was born and raised. I'm not sure if you've heard of Templeton Rye Whiskey, but that's where that was from. So we were there for about a year while he was in Vietnam. And then when he came back, we were sent to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. We were there for a couple of years. And then he decided he was going to be an orthodontist. So we moved. He went to the Army had him go to UMKC, University of Missouri, Kansas City, to learn orthodontics. And so then we moved to Shawnee, Kansas, which is a suburb of Kansas City. We lived there for a couple of years, and that's when I was probably 9 to 12 years old, and that's when I became a big fan of the Royals and Chiefs, Kansas City teams. So I'm big fans of theirs. Okay, so then we went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, from 1973 to 1977, and in 1977 was my senior year of high school. We were a month into my senior year of high school when we were sent to Korea for a couple of years. So wow. I actually graduated from an Army American high school on the Yongsan Army base in Seoul, Korea. It was a real, that was, I didn't mind all the moves that we made growing up, but that was the worst. That was the hardest one because, you've been through the same high school for 3+ years, and then you have to leave and make new friends. And, it's a different country. Although you're on an Army base, you still know you're in a different country. But I learned to love it. I mean, I started to learn some of the Korean language. I learned to love the Korean food. In fact, in the back of my mind, at some point, I think I'd like to open a Korean restaurant in Sioux Falls because Korean barbecue restaurants are pretty popular in some places. So that's something I might do. I don't know, at some point. But from there, I graduated from high school in 1978, and then I stayed there a year after that because my dad was stationed there for 2 years. So we had one more year to go. So that second year, basically, I made money by talking to Korean college students. It's kind of a weird story, but they would pay you just to talk to them because the Korean in the Korean schools, they would learn English from first grade on up, but they had very little opportunity to actually use it. So they would pay you just to sit and talk. So we would go to coffee houses, restaurants, and just sit there and talk. So in addition to paying you, they would buy your lunch. They'd buy your coffee. It was just a great deal all the way around. So I learned to really appreciate the Korean culture and food and things like that. So that was a great experience. And then from there, we came back to the States, and my dad was stationed again in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas for the second time. But while he was stationed there, it was time for me to go to college. So I went to Iowa State University, another Iowa reference there. And I studied meteorology there. I've been interested in meteorology for a long, long time. Since we lived in Fort Sill, as I mentioned earlier, Fort Sill, Oklahoma is basically right in the middle of what we call Tornado Alley.
Yes.
That's the part of the country that gets more tornadoes than anywhere else in the world, basically. And so I became really interested in meteorology there. So that's what I knew I wanted to do. I didn't know I wanted to get into television, but I just knew I wanted to study weather. So I did that. Am I speaking too long, or should we keep going?
No, you're good.
Okay, good. Okay, so I went to Iowa State, and between my junior and senior year, one of my advisors called me and said, "Hey, Phil, I think I got something that you'd be interested in." There was an internship at a TV station in Waterloo, Iowa. It was KWWL, and it was actually a paid internship, which you don't really see very often. But I guess the gentleman had passed away years ago, and he left a bunch of money for people like me who are interested in getting into television broadcasting, whether it's the news part or weather. But anyway, so I was paid $300 a month, which was great because I paid $100 rent, I remember, for this dumpy little place in Waterloo. But that was fine because I wasn't there that much. I was basically at the TV station the whole time. So I was able to learn about weather and forecasting, and also a chance to practice on camera. I was able to do that. So that allowed me at the end of the summer to get a job at WOI TV at that time was in Ames, Iowa. They since moved to Des Moines, but just by virtue of having that tape of me doing the weather during my internship, that got me a job doing weekend weather at WOI while I was going to college my senior year. So that was just awesome experience for me to be able to not only continue my studying, but also continue to practice in front of the camera and get better at it. And so that was great. So when I graduated, I had another tape, which with much more weathercasting on there, and that allowed me to get a job in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in 1986. From 1988, I did weekend weather and reporting in Cedar Rapids at KCRG for 2 years. And then from there, I moved to Sioux Falls, and I've been here ever since doing weather from 1988 to now. So we're talking 29 years in September. I'll be here 29 years just doing weather 5, 6, and 10 every night. So that kind of brings you up to speed.
Yeah, you now know a shortened down version of Phil Schreck.
Right.
So what is it really that got you interested in meteorology, Phil?
Well, at first I remember seeing a TV movie about hurricanes. It probably was 1974. I don't remember the name of it. It was a big TV show. It was like a 2-hour movie. And I thought, I want to study hurricanes. But then I realized that probably wasn't going to happen. I was living in the middle of the country. So then I thought, well, what is maybe a little more interesting than hurricanes than tornadoes? So again, moving to Fort Sill and living there in the midst of Tornado Alley and having these tornado warnings and tornado watches pretty much, well, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but almost every day during the summer, you get really interested in that too. So my interest kind of shifted from hurricanes more towards severe storms and tornadoes. So that would be it, I guess, just living in Fort Sill.
Yeah, that probably gave you a very close up and personal view of kind of how some of the weather things work, like tornadoes. That probably was I would probably get interested in that kind of thing if that was happening every summer or every spring, whenever the tornadoes would happen. But yeah, that would be something that people are interested in running from tornadoes, but
right.
It is kind of interesting just to study some things and how they happen, like hurricanes and tornadoes and that kind of thing. And actually, I am doing that right now on online class that I'm taking through NCC in Sheldon. I'm learning about meteorology. Just started the class, so that's one reason I kind of was interested in talking to you a little bit. What can you give me any of the kind of some of the details on how meteorologists study, and maybe also some tips on how to study for meteorology?
Well, there's one thing you want to do is if you're interested in going into meteorology and you're still in high school or even in college, it involves a lot of math and some chemistry and some physics in there, because you have to learn about basically fluid dynamics, because the atmosphere, even though it's just air, it basically acts like a fluid. So you need to learn all the properties of fluid dynamics and thermodynamics and things like that. So you need to have a pretty good background in the math and physics and some chemistry. In fact, when I was at Iowa State, I didn't really, other than your basic meteorology 101, I didn't really take any in-depth meteorology classes until my third and fourth years, because everything else is the foundation that you have to take to be able to understand then the meteorology classes. The thing about Iowa State when I was there is they didn't teach you a lot about, as funny as it sounds, weather forecasting. It was more of they kind of expect you to go into research and things like that. So you kind of had to learn your forecasting on your own. And that was why I enjoyed my internship so much, because I learned so much that summer from Craig Johnson, who was the chief meteorologist in KWWL at that time in 1985. So that's where I learned a lot of my forecasting. And then if you want to get into the television part of it, you need to have a pretty good background in, speech communication, and maybe taking some classes where you get comfortable and talking on the radio, or, doing podcasts like yourself, or, getting in front of a television camera if that's possible. So
yeah,
a lot of things other than just the meteorology classes that you have to kind of study up on.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not necessarily interested in being a meteorologist, but I am taking it because I kind of need a science class for credits wise. But it was one of those things that really interested me when I was looking at the science classes that were available. There's some things that aren't as interesting to me, and then I was like, it kind of be interesting to understand how the weather works a little bit more. That's one of the things that kind of leaped out to me a little bit when I was looking at classes last spring of what I was going to take this fall, and it's been pretty interesting so far. I really haven't gotten into my textbook yet. I've actually got something due tonight for meteorology that I have to work on, but I am looking forward to studying how the weather works a little bit. Yeah,
well, if you have any questions, feel free to message me or something. I'll see if I can help you with your homework. But another good deal. If you're interested in weather, and we're past this season now, but every spring, Todd Heitkamp from the National Weather Service here in Sioux Falls, he does his storm spotter training all over the place, and I think he may even go to Sheldon. He goes into Minnesota, Iowa, probably even northeast Nebraska and much of South Dakota. He travels around and gives these presentations about. It's focused mainly on storm spotting and things like that, but you also learn quite a bit about other things about meteorology too, so that's something to keep in mind maybe for next spring if you hear about that.
Yeah, no, actually my dad is taken one of those classes from Todd.
Okay.
And he's kind of been quote unquote a trained weather spotter a little bit.
Sure.
So or storm spotter. So he's kind of looked at that a little bit, and he really, I don't know how in depth, he doesn't like go out and try and look for storms every time there's cloudy weather or anything, but I think he's got kind of a rough idea of when things are going to happen, or what is what when you see a big cloud, what is that, or whatever, but
right. I've never myself, as funny as it sounds, I've never seen a tornado, and even all that time I lived in Oklahoma, for the basic reason is as soon as the warnings came out, we were in the basement. So Mom and Dad were like, get down here, so I didn't go out and look for them. And I've seen a couple of funnel clouds before, which basically, there's a difference between funnel clouds and tornadoes. A tornado is a funnel cloud that touches the ground. If it doesn't touch the ground, it's just called a funnel cloud. I've seen a couple of those, and I don't go out storm chasing normally, because if there are tornadic storms around, I'm usually at work, going on air and giving the warnings and things like that. And so we leave the tornado chasing to other people.
Yeah. And I'm sure you're probably a little bit grateful for that you don't have to try and put yourself in danger that way.
Yeah, I think my wife is too. She's happy that I'm not, I've got a wife and 5 kids, so I don't need to be out, get in a dangerous storm situation, leaving them behind.
Yeah, that's right. So what behind the scenes type of work goes into getting ready to tell viewers about the weather? You've been doing it for 29 years, you said, with KSFY.
Right.
What do you have to do to prepare for a weather forecast?
Well, the first thing I do when I go in is you have to kind of pour through all the information that's in there waiting for you to make your forecast, and you got to figure out what's going on. I mean, we have all kinds of obviously the internet. We have access to all kinds of computer models and satellite pictures and radar and weather maps and things like that. So you have to sit down there and first of all figure out what's happening in the weather and make your forecast. And so I usually go in about 2:00 in the afternoon. We record a couple of afternoon updates that air during our programming, such as Ellen and Jeopardy and things like that. And that doesn't take very long. So that leaves me time to sit down there and make my forecast. And that usually takes, a couple hours, depending on the weather situation. I mean, a day like today, it wouldn't take too long because it's basically sunny and nice outside. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be that way tomorrow too. I've been off for a couple of days. So, so that's the first thing you do is you make your forecast, and then you have to make all the weather graphics that you see behind the weather person when they're doing the weather. Most of those are made by the weather person themselves. So you have to know how to work the computer and make your graphics and things like that. And so that usually takes me right up to about 5:00, which is when our first newscast is. And then I'm ready to go. I really don't have a script. I don't really think about what I'm going to say until I get up there in front of the camera. It's just basically all ad lib. But basically, you can think of your weather maps as a script, so to speak, because you can just talk about what's happening on your weather maps and things like that. It used to be when I first started that I would write everything out that I was going to say and then memorize it, which there's a couple things wrong with that. The one thing is if that's what you do and you're just kind of reading back what you had memorized, it doesn't sound natural. And then plus, if you forget part of it, and then you're just kind of messed up for the rest of the time, which happened to me. I would forget what I was going to say, and then it was a disaster. So anymore, it's just I get up there and just start talking and go from there. And then 5:30, we have a break between 5:30 and 6. And at that point, I'll try to freshen up some graphics. Maybe I want to make the 6:00 weathercast look a little bit different than the 5:00. Usually what we found out through our research in audience, how they watch television is a lot of folks, they'll watch the 5:00 show and then they might switch to a different channel to watch the 6 and vice versa. So it's not like most people probably don't sit there and watch the 5 and 6, but some do. So I just try to make it look a little bit different for those folks where they're not going to be like, oh, I just saw you do that. Let's freshen it up a little bit. So I try to do that. And then 6:30, I get my dinner break. If there's severe weather around, I just stay at the station. If there's not, I can go home and have dinner with my wife and kids and then come on back and get ready to do the 10:00 show, which is, you use a lot of the same graphics. A lot of things don't change between 6 and 10. Sometimes they do if it's a fluid situation and there's severe storms and things like that. But so you can just kind of freshen things up for the 10:00 show and do it all over again. And I'm usually home after the 10:00 show. I'm usually home by, 10:50, 11 o'clock at night. So that's basically my day in a nutshell, at least as far as work is concerned.
Yeah, one of the things I'm sure you've probably had over the years is people complaining about your wrong weather forecast because everybody makes mistakes. We're all human. So give me one particular story of somebody that was maybe really angry with your wrong forecast or just something you maybe said on the weather.
Well, the good news is it doesn't happen that often. I mean,
good.
I may blow a forecast, once in a while, but as far as people getting angry, that doesn't happen very often. There was one time, really only one time that comes to mind was there was a guy in northeastern South Dakota who was going to go camping, and I'm not sure if you're kind of familiar with northeastern South Dakota, but it's just a really weird geography. There's peaks and valleys, and there's the Buffalo Ridge that starts in southwest Minnesota, goes up into northeastern South Dakota. So things can change really rapidly in that area. So I think what happened was I made a forecast for Aberdeen, which is pretty much in a flat area and pretty easy to forecast for. But I think someone was going to go camping up in the Sisseton Hills somewhere up in there where the weather can be very, very different. And apparently they had a lot of snow when I forecasted a nice day, which I think they had in Aberdeen, but where he was, it was pretty bad. So I got a phone call that day, and he was a little bit miffed Thankfully, it was a voicemail. I didn't really have to talk to him live, but really, that's about the only one. People around here are very, very understanding. I think they're very nice, and they understand that weather is not an exact science, and they understand once in a while. Now, if you blow it on a daily basis, then they're going to get a little tired of it, you know.
Yeah.
But if it happens once in a while, I think people are pretty forgiving.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear, because I was expecting to hear some different stories about that. So I guess maybe that happens more in bigger cities, New York or L.A. or something like that, but not so much around here, and you're probably very thankful for that.
Yes, I am. Yeah, people are pretty nice. So yeah.
So you kind of mentioned a little bit about where you've worked over the years. So ever since you moved to Sioux Falls, you have basically worked at KSFY, is that correct?
Yes, I was hired on as the senior meteorologist from the beginning, and that's the position I've had since then, doing the weeknight news. Occasionally I do weekends if there's a vacation issue or the weekend guy needs some time off, and you work for him, or say if the weekend person leaves and they're in the process of hiring somebody else, you kind of have to fill that position. But yeah, I've had the same hours since I started here, so my family's used to it. It's kind of nice when the kids are little, because you can spend time with them. My wife's a teacher, so during the school year, of course, she's out the door at 7 o'clock in the morning or so, and I don't go to work till about 2 in the afternoon. So it's great when the kids are babies or before they're school age. I can stay home with them and help take care of them, and you can save on daycare, and there's obviously more bonding time with the kids when they're growing up. So the schedule is great when they're little like that, but it's not so great when they're older, because basically you see them, they're out the door. My wife and kids are out the door to go to school, and in the morning, and I'll see them at dinner time, and that's about it. So there's not a lot of family time during the school year, but everybody's used to it. So kind of it's not something that's new to them. So everybody I wish it could be a little different sometimes, but everybody's used to it. Yeah.
You've been there for 29 years, and I'm sure you've seen many people go in and out from KSFY. Give me a couple of people that you've really came close with, and maybe you've gotten pretty close friendships with since you've worked there.
Well, let's see. Probably, Brian Allen, who he's been there for quite a while too. In fact, this is his second stint at KSFY. He started out here years ago, and then left and went to I believe Las Vegas, and then came back. So he's a guy that I'm pretty close to, and probably when I first started here back in 1988. There was the anchorman at that time. His name was Tom Rooney, and he was really a great guy. He still is. He's still around town here, but he was the quintessential newsman. He had the look, he had the voice, he had the kind of the authority, the feeling of authority when you watched him, and I was really impressed by him. And I still see him around town once in a while, and he was real nice to me. And Kelly Eggers was the female anchor at that point. In fact, she started the same day I did, and so I kind of got close to those two, but just due to the fact that I was the new guy, and so was Kelly. But Tom really took us under his wing, and that was nice to have when you're starting at a new job in a new city and things like that. So I guess that's the name that comes to mind the most. I mean, we've been through a lot in my 29 years. See, in this market size at Sioux Falls, I think we're about 113. So basically, when you talk about market size, New York would be number one, and then LA and Chicago, Houston maybe on down the line. So we're kind of right in the middle. I think there's 215 market sizes. So we're kind of right in the middle in Sioux Falls as far as market size is concerned. So this is kind of a place where people come and they put in a little time and they get better, and then they move on to bigger markets. Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot of people that have come and gone so it's hard to get real close relationships with people because they're not here all that long. So, so I guess Tom is the only one. So in my case, I thought I would be here I signed a 2-year contract when I first started here. So this was back in 1988. I thought, okay, I'll be here for a couple of years and I'll move on. But I just learned to love Sioux Falls, and in between there, in about early 1990, I met my wife. Of course, at that time I didn't know she was going to be my wife, but
Right.
and that's another reason I decided to stay, because I knew she was pretty special, and she's a Sioux Falls gal, and she really wasn't keen on moving. So, but I'm so glad that I've stayed here. The KSFY has treated me so well over the almost 30 years I've been here. So it's kind of unusual for somebody to be around as long as I have, but I'm really glad that I have.
Have you gotten to know Sean Cable a little bit?
Oh yeah, Sean's a great guy. The thing with Sean is that his schedule is so much different than mine that I don't see him that often. As weird as it sounds. I mean, he comes in probably about, I don't know, 2-3 o'clock in the morning, and he's gone probably by, depending on the weather, but he's probably gone by noon, maybe a little earlier every day. So I rarely see him. Occasionally we'll have weather person meetings, or we'll meet during our staff meetings and things like that. But he's a great guy.
Yeah, and one of the things I've noticed about KSFY, that almost if you haven't watched the news in a while and you turn on the TV, there's always going to be somebody almost. I mean, this is kind of with every news channel like around here, because like you said, it's kind of a mid market. Everybody's looking to kind of advance, and it's
right.
Almost kind of always a new person. It seems like when I turn the news, I don't watch the news a whole lot, but you from KSFY and Brian Allen and Sean Cable, those are three guys that have kind of been kind of stalwarts there at KSFY, and then of course Kelloland, they've got some people that they've had there for years, but then they've got their new people too. So it's kind of interesting to see a lot of the people that you grew up watching. You still have some of that with some of the stations, but also you get a lot of new faces in there, as people just don't really want to settle for just being in Sioux Falls.
Right. So that's one of the nice things about, as you mentioned, KSFY. I mean, Brian's been here a long time. I've been here a long time. Eric Thorstensen, our sports guy, he's been here. I think he started in 1992.
Yeah.
So we've had some folks that have been here around here quite a long time. So, yeah, you're right. It's kind of nice to have familiar faces hanging on that you're comfortable with and that you trust. So, yeah.
So you mentioned your interests outside of work. You're a Chiefs fan and a Royals fan.
Right.
The Royals have kind of been hovering around 500 this year.
Yeah.
They've been playing tough with my Twins. What's your expectation? You think the Royals make the playoffs?
I hate to say it, but I think not. I think their pitching situation is just not good enough to get them. I think we're looking at basically the second wild card of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think their pitching is not as good as it used to be, obviously, especially their relief pitching. So that's always a concern. Every time there's a close game, it used to be in the past, 2014, 2015, it was a lock that the Royals would win because the relief pitching would shut them down. But they don't have that anymore. And it's kind of sad because there's a lot of guys in the Royals that are free agents that are not going to be back next year. Mm-hmm. You got Lorenzo Cain, Mike Moustakas, Alcides Escobar, Eric Hosmer. So the heart of this team is not going to be here next year. So I think this is the Royals' last chance, realistically, for a while to be contenders. Mm-hmm. So I hope they can do it, but I just kind of have my doubts. And the Twins, I mean, they're so surprising. After the year they had last year, mm-hmm. to be able to turn it around like this, and you really got to give credit to Paul Molitor. I mean, he's doing a great job with those guys. So I'm really impressed with them.
Yeah, he's been really good. I think one of the key parts for the Twins also has been they brought in some of those veterans that used to be on the team. Torrey Hunter came back after retiring. He came back to the clubhouse, and he's been helping out with those guys. And Michael Kadire came back along with LaTroy Hawkins. They're kind of all people that the players can talk to about the game and that kind of stuff. Because one of the things I think that was missing with the Twins last year was that they were very their clubhouse was not very friendly. It wasn't very
Right.
sociable. Not a lot of vocal leaders in that clubhouse.
You need that veteran leadership, and that's really a huge thing, because when you have a bunch of young guys that don't really know how to play the game the right way, maybe, and you don't know how you're supposed to act in certain situations and what you should do. That's made a huge difference to the Twins. It's nice to see. I mean, I remember my wife and I went to a game a couple of years ago. Maybe it was last year when the Twins were really bad and out of it. The excitement just wasn't there.
No.
It's just. But and then we went to a game this year when the Twins were playing the Yankees. Unfortunately, the Twins lost that game. But when you sit out there before the game, you maybe have some dinner or something outside in the stadium, and you could just feel the excitement in the air.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the difference when your team is doing really well and they're in contention. It makes such a huge difference. Otherwise, it's almost just kind of like a mausoleum in there, I remember one time, especially back in the Dome days when the Twins were bad. You go to a game. I remember going to a game and it was like you're sitting it's like there was nobody there. I mean, there was only about 8,000 fans there is all, and they weren't even making any noise. It was just real depressing. The Metrodome to me was always kind of depressing anyway inside, unless the fans were into it, and of course, obviously in '87, '91.
Yeah.
I mean, the Dome was a big plus for them, but on a normal basis, you go to a game, it's beautiful outside. You go inside, and it's kind of dank, and I don't know. I just love the new field they have here. It's in Minneapolis. It's a great stadium.
Yeah, that I agree with you. I've never actually went to a Twins game at the Metrodome, but Target Field, I've been there three times, I think, 3 or 4 times, and it is a really beautiful ballpark.
Oh yeah.
And one thing I've seen Vikings games at the Metrodome, and those were just like there was not a whole lot of enthusiasm other than from the crowd. I mean, there was some really good games. Like I was there for a game when Brett Favre was there in 2009, and then that was obviously a really, really big year for the Vikings, so things were going well. But the new stadium for the Vikings, US Bank Stadium, you get the idea of the outdoor with the reflective or the glass that you can see through. It's a lot nicer, and it gives you that outdoor kind of a feel too.
Yeah, it's great for everybody except the birds that keep flying into the window, right? Right.
Yeah, I've heard about that. I don't know. Is it confirmed? Is it a rumor?
I don't know. Maybe it's just an urban legend, but yeah.
All right, my last question: How do you think the Chiefs are going to do this year? Got a new quarterback in there, maybe going to take the job from Alex Smith at some point during the season. Got a new running back. What do you think?
I think that the Chiefs will be. I don't think Mahomes will play unless Alex Smith gets injured. I mean, I don't think Andy Reid would bench Alex Smith unless he's really bad or he gets injured. I think Pat Mahomes is a guy who's going to sit and probably wait another year before he'll be the starting guy. So I think the Chiefs are going to be just like they have been recently. They'll be good enough just to get into the playoffs, but then not very far in the playoffs. So I remember the last time the Chiefs were in the Super Bowl was 1970, and I won't say who they beat. Maybe you know. It was the Vikings. I
know. Yeah.
But anyway, so that is the last time they even. Well, in 1994, I think they got close. They made it to the AFC Championship game. But yeah, I just think Alex Smith is just good enough, and the team is just good enough to get them to the playoffs, but not much further through the playoffs. But I think maybe in the next year or two, when Pat Mahomes is the guy, that from what I've been reading and seeing, he's very impressive. Even just as young as he is, he's been very impressive in training camp and during the preseason games. So maybe in the next year or two, when he is the guy, the Chiefs will be able to go a little further in the playoffs.
Yeah, bright future hopefully for the Chiefs and hopefully for the Royals, even though you didn't paint necessarily a great picture there with all these free agents leaving.
I hope I'm wrong.
Well, yeah. Hopefully they can at least get a couple of guys back and remain at least somewhat competitive. So
yeah, the way they got what they are is through their farm system. They had a great farm system, but what I've been reading, unfortunately, is that the farm system isn't nearly as good as it used to be. So it may be a while for the rebuilding process. So we'll see.
Yeah, you never know. You never know.
Yep.
So you can catch Phil Schreck on KSFY weekdays. You said 5, 6, and 10. And you can follow him on Twitter at PhilKSFY. Phil, anything else you want to say before we end the show?
No, I just appreciate you having interest in me, and thanks for having me on.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and taking the time to talk to me also. So
no problem.
Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you on the news.
All right, great.
All right. Have a good one, Phil. Thanks. All right, that is Phil Schreck of KSFY. And that is going to do it for the show this week. We'll be back again next week with another episode of The Schuby Show. We'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to The Schuby Show. We hope you mildly enjoyed yourself with more never-ending nonsense with yours truly. For more nonsense, go to the website, theschubyshow.com. Get the show on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Until next time, Skol.